Hello, and welcome to this short virtual lecture which will give you an example of the curriculum in the module Demand Management and Energy Storage. My name is Gudrun Kocher Oberlehner, and I am the responsible academic member of staff at Heriot-Watt for this module. So let's start with a brief introduction to the module itself. In this module, we introduce demand-side management measures and provide an overview on how demand-side management works and its contribution to electricity network capacity and also to grid security. The module generally deals with how electricity grids work, how they work now, and how they will most likely work in the future. We are including energy efficiency measures, which we see as an important component of these future networks, and of course, energy storage technologies, which are essential to all forms of electricity grids. We will review the different energy storage principles and the major technologies that are currently on the market. And as all our teaching is research-led, you will also hear about the latest research and development in the area. Electricity is of course not the only form of energy that we use, but it is an integral part of our daily lives. And while it is relatively straightforward to generate electricity, it is not easy to store it. As a matter of fact, it is impossible to store electricity as electricity. But we do have different energy storage and electricity storage technologies which are used for different applications. But each form of storage means that we need to transform electricity into another form of energy that can be stored, like kinetic energy in the case of flywheels, or potential energy in the case of pumped hydro storage. And because of these transformations, we will never get the same amount of electricity out of our storage system that we originally put into it. But here, in this little clip, we will focus on only one of the available storage technologies, and it is one of the few grid-sized storage technologies that we have at our disposal. It is also the most mature electricity storage technology that we have available, and I am talking, of course, about pumped hydro storage. Pumped hydro storage has already been used for nearly 100 years, and it is used all around the world. To start with, let me show you a little animation on how it works. Every pumped hydro storage plant has an upper and a lower reservoir. Both of these can be filled with water. When the upper reservoir is sufficiently full, the plant can generate electricity like any hydropower plant by transforming the potential energy of the water in the upper reservoir into electricity, using a turbine and an attached generator. In the process, the upper reservoir is emptied while the lower reservoir fills up. Usually during the night, when people need less electricity, there is a surplus of electricity generated. This surplus is taken by the pumped hydro storage plant from the net and is used to pump the water from the lower reservoir back up to the upper reservoir. As we have heard at the beginning of the little animation, pumped hydro storage plants are very similar to conventional hydroelectric power plants. They both use the same technology, the same type of turbines to generate electricity. And are doing this by transforming potential energy into kinetic and subsequently into electric energy. So what is the major difference between the two types of power plants? Again, we could already see it in the clip. A pumped hydro storage plant will always have two reservoirs. It has both an upper and a lower reservoir, whereas a conventional hydropower plant only needs one reservoir, or even none. This is most obvious if you look at the run-of-the-river plant. A pumped hydro storage plant needs two reservoirs to be able to both use electricity when there is too much of it in the net and to generate it when there is not enough of it. The graph in this slide shows a schematic of Ben Cruachan, a pumped hydro storage scheme in Scotland. This particular plant has a head of 360 meters, a rated power output of 440 megawatt, and the upper reservoir has a size of 10 million cubic meters. The dam for the upper reservoir is shown in the little insert. The graph already hints on another characteristic of pumped hydro storage. The amount of energy stored is equal to the potential energy of the body of water in the upper reservoir. And the potential energy in turn depends on the mass, the gravity, and on how high up the reservoir is placed. If you want to increase the energy capacity, the amount of energy stored in the upper reservoir, you can either increase the mass of it by making it bigger, or you can increase the height. Or to be more specific, you can increase the height difference between the water intake in the upper reservoir and the turbine. This height difference is called the hydrostatic head. As a rule of thumb, the higher the head, the more efficient the hydro storage scheme. Most hydro storage schemes have heads of over 50 meters, and in mountainous areas, heads are typically several hundred meters, and even 2 kilometers are possible. What is also shown here is that the powerhouse, the place housing the turbines and generators, is underground, something that is frequently done to limit the optical impact of hydropower schemes. The lower reservoir for Ben Cruachan is Loch Awe, which is the 5th largest loch in Scotland by volume. In most of the cases, the lower reservoir is formed by a lake, which makes sense if you consider the amount of water needed to be pumped up and released. But it is also possible to use a river as the lower reservoir. However, it needs to be a big river. The Danube, with an average flow rate of over 2,000 cubic meters per second, qualifies as such a big river. The pumped hydro storage scheme that is depicted here is called Runner and is located in Austria. It takes its name from the river Runner, which is used to form the upper reservoir. It is considerably smaller than Ben Cruachan, with an upper reservoir size of only 2.35 million cubic meters, a head of 50 meters, and the rated output power of 19 megawatts. It is also an example for a refurbished plant. It was originally finished in 1925 as a hydroelectric power plant using only the river Runner. In 1954, it was converted to a pumped hydro scheme by adding a dam to the river Runner, which now forms the upper reservoir. The river Danube, 50 meters below, serves as the lower reservoir. Overall, there are hundreds of pumped hydro schemes operating worldwide, and they add up to about 120 gigawatts of installed capacity. The installed hydroelectric capacity is nearly 8 times that and comes to 940 gigawatts. The load factor of hydroelectric plants lies usually around 40%. This means that the plant generated electricity at its rated output power for about 40% of the time. This also means that annually we get 3,400 terawatt hours of electricity generated by hydroelectricity schemes. What do you think is the load factor of pumped hydro storage plants, if compared to conventional hydropower plants? Can you figure it out with the help of this graph? Assuming the same 40% load factor for pumped hydro storage would lead to an annual electricity generation of 420 terawatt hours. If you look at the bar on the right side of the graph, you can clearly see that this is not the case. If you compare the percentage of pumped hydro storage in rated capacity on the left side with the percentage in generated electricity on the right side, you can see that the percentage of pumped hydro storage in the right bar is much smaller than the one in the left bar. So the load factor is clearly smaller. This makes sense if you consider that pumped hydro storage only delivers electricity when it is needed, usually during peak times, whereas conventional hydro is supposed to run as much as possible. Generally, the load factor for pumped hydro storage lies between 10 and 20%. So we get only about 1/3 of the electricity out from a pumped hydro storage scheme when compared to a conventional plant with the same rated output power. The graph in this slide shows that the construction of pumped hydro storage schemes declined significantly in the 1990s and did not pick up between 2000 and 2010. However, there are quite a few new plants currently in planning or construction. Can you think of a reason why we will need more electricity storage in the future? The reason is, of course, the increasing amount of renewable electricity generation from very intermittent sources. Both wind and solar are much more variable in their electricity output than hydropower or fossil fuel power plants. On the other hand, pumped hydro storage also works very well with nuclear power plants, as these are usually less flexible and especially the older designs are not capable of frequent variations in output power. So we will most likely need more electricity storage capacity in the future, both on a small and a large grid-sized scale. I have also heard that pumped hydro storage plants and conventional hydroelectric plants are similar enough that, given the right conditions, hydroelectric plants can be refurbished to work as pumped hydro storage plants. But what are these right conditions? Would it be advisable to convert one of the big run-of-the-river plants on the Danube to a pumped hydro storage scheme? Or would you recommend a small mountain stream which could provide a high head for a grid-sized storage scheme? You should now be able to answer these questions. Okay, this brings us to the end of our mini lecture and to the last question. This question is an example for an exam question. I had to split the question as the editing software only allows simple quizzes. In an exam, this would be one single question, and it would be worth about 8% of the mark. You should be able to answer it using the material provided in the mini lecture. If you cannot answer the question straight away, it might help if you listen to the lecture again. Thanks for your attention.